I know he'll never be forgotten. He was a king and crown. I know I'll always remember the warmth of his eyes. Lingers so long, I'm sure he's still around. For those who heard, they repeat. So those who hear won't forget the sound of each phrase, echoes of time, uncountable by days. The things he played are with us now, and they'll endure should time allow. Oh yes, I remember Clifford. I seem to always hear him play. Somehow every day I hear his lovely tone in every trumpet sound. It had a beauty of its own. So how can we say someone so real has really gone away? I hear him now, I always will. Believe me, I remember Clifford Steve. Every day I hear his lovely tone, in every trumpet sound it had a beauty all its own. So how can we say someone so real has really gone away? I hear him and always will. Believe me, I remember Clifford Steve. somebody else.
plaintive little tune when babies start to cry. Rock-a-bye, my baby. Someday there may be a land that's free for you and me and the Russian lullaby.
say you love me and you hold me tight, but when I awake you're out of sight. Ooh, done that dream, done your and down your eyes, they take me up into the moonlit sky. Then I tumble out of paradise. Ooh, done that dream, done that one time. Mind of mine, it can't understand why you don't care. And just a change, the mood I'm in, I welcome a nice nightmare. Done the dream, but blessed too without that dream I never would have you. But it haunts me and it won't come true. Ooh, done that dream. Done that one track, mind of mine, it can't understand why you don't care. Just a change, the mood I'm in, I'd welcome a nice nightmare. Done that dream, but blessed too without that dream I never would have you. 'Cause it haunts me and it won't come true. Done that dream, done that dream.
sacred eyes of the Virgin Mary. Sing me now to sleep with your ancient rhyme. Stay and talk a while about the good old time. Sing me now to sleep, grandmother of charms. Please don't leave me yet, I'm scared of the dark. We'd sit and sip our coffee, talk away the heat. You'd tell me all the gossip of your neighbors on the street. Your children used to play here, but they've long time moved away. Only widows with their shades have chosen to remain. Sing me now to sleep with your ancient rhyme. Stay and talk a while about the good old times. Sing me now to sleep, grandmother of charm. Please don't leave me yet, I'm scared of the dark. Phone call on that morning woke me from a dream and left me in a nightmare. Daylight won't relieve. I will not hear your voice again. I will not hear you sing. Oh, your mercy and your love have gone with your blessing. Sing me now to sleep with your ancient rhyme. Stay and talk a while about the good old time. Sing me now to sleep, grandmother of charms. Please don't leave me yet, I'm scared of the dark. Please don't leave me yet, I'm scared of the dark.
Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found.
You brought me nothing but misery. You brought me nothing but pain. Our love is a nightmare every day.
Let's toast this bad dream with another round. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking another round until we forget the pain we found.
Drunks like I should never fall in love.
Drunks like I should never part.
We'd be more miserable if we were alone.
Let's drink to this aching in our hearts. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking to forget all the sorrows since we met. Join me in drinking and all around until we forget the pain we found. Until we forget the pain we found.
Cold boulder, red, hot and black, burning none too cleanly. Cold boulder, roll on back. Will you crush the new life today and know you won't look back? I am standing simple, I am standing proud. I was hand in hand, you know I was head in clouds. There were men here shoveling me long before us, giving heat where we now scrape our feet. Temple now stands around us, it stands for fire long gone out as do I. There is life here, frozen for us with diamonds and soil. Well, slipping up now would be catastrophic. I'd fall down like a sack of meat at your feet. Silly cool boulder, you were just older, but we're heavy, burnt and black. This house now abandoned on a frozen moor. I could not ask for more. There's a pine we found that river again. I could not ask for more. Get the time in mind, I kept the road in mind. I wish you'd ask for more. There's my coat, there's the door. Standing silent, you are standing cold. Life is fearsome, but I am growing bolder. I am standing simple and I stand alone. You show the way now, and I am going home. I am standing silent, you are standing cold. Life is fearsome, but I'm growing bolder. I'm standing simple and I stand alone. You show the way now, and I am going home. I am standing silent, you are standing cold. Life is fearsome, I'm growing bolder. I'm standing simple and I stand alone. You show the way now, and I am going home. I am standing silent, you are standing cold. Life is fearsome, I'm growing bolder. I'm standing simple and I stand alone. You show the way now, I'm going home. I am standing silent, you are standing cold. Life is fearsome, but I'm growing bolder. I am standing simple and I stand alone. You show the way now, and I am going home.
Come
talk, we cry. We got so low, drove around all night in your car. Colored me foolish, colored me weak, color me with your love. Tell me you love me, tell me times 10, tell me you'll never leave again. Tell me you love me, tell me times 10, tell me you'll never leave again. Tell me you love me, tell me times 10, tell me you'll never I should seek from the start. 'Cause I have you tonight, worth more to me than anyone in my life. Please sit with me and talk for a while, 'cause I have you tonight. Yes, I have you tonight.
The council was called to order earlier at 6 o'clock, and we voted on going into a closed session to discuss personnel issues. We have completed that closed session, although we didn't get to the administrative discussion that we had been planning on. We'll have to reschedule that for another day. But we are going on now to the rest of the items on the agenda. The first item is council comments or announcements. Are there any council comments or announcements? I would like to note that Councilmember Austin Lane will not be joining us this evening as she's out of town today. Okay, I saw them in the order of Colleen and Terry and Ruben and Bruce.
Let's see, I'll start with something happy. I'm going to have a party at my house for Ward 2 folks on October 27th from 4 to 8. And since my basement is currently empty in anticipation of a rebuild to come, we're going to have a haunted house in the bottom of my house. So I encourage folks to come and bring their kids.
With no decorations needed.
Okay, it's not that bad, Bruce. Bruce is the contractor.
If you don't like it, you know where to complain.
That's right. The second thing is back to the dogs issue. As many of you know, there was a young man who was attacked by a pit bull in my neighborhood over the August recess and was seriously injured and spent a few days in the hospital, and the dog was put down as a result of the incident. And I let folks on the council know that this would be coming up as an issue. And unfortunately, what that did was lead to all of our home addresses and phone numbers being posted on the internet, on national websites. And I've gotten a lot of mail from people outside the city, including people who told me that they could make my life more or less miserable depending on what I did over the dog legislation. So I want to put it back out there again that there is not a proposal before the council at this time. There was just a notice that this was an issue that came up in the community and that there are several people in my ward who are interested in talking about the different mechanisms that we might use to address dangerous dogs in the community. And I think that if the council were to do anything at all, that we would be looking at something that was, effective and fair and something that was affordable. And there's a lot of concern about breed-specific legislation and like a breed-specific ban that has been talked about. And there's been a request to find out, what the legal parameters are. That's just a normal process that we go through. It's not a sign that we're interested in doing anything or not doing anything. It's just part of the process. When you have an issue in Maryland, you don't always have the authority to act on it as a city. And so the first thing that you have to do is find out what your authorities are and what you can do. So I just wanted to reiterate that for the third time.
Okay, Terry?
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Breed-specific ban, I think that's what Prince George's County has.
It is.
I think we had a model-specific ban for Corvairs years ago, and that caused a lot of consternation, too. On the lighter side, there's a couple of events coming up this week on October 3rd that I wanted to mention. The Tacoma Park Recreation Department is going to be providing rides to the farmers market at the crossroads on New Hampshire Avenue at 7676 New Hampshire Avenue on Wednesday. There are 3 pickup points here in the city, right here at the Community Center building at 3 p.m. The bus will leave. People can meet here and get on the bus. It will proceed down Maple Avenue and pick up interested community members at the Franklin Apartments. Should be there at about 3:05 at 7620 Maple Avenue. It will then go up on Carroll Avenue and pick up residents at the Victory Towers. We'll be there at 3:15 p.m. There is no charge for the bus ride. The farmers market offers a great variety of fresh produce. The bus riders will have opportunity to also shop in other stores in that area. And there will be a return trip that is also free to drop you off back at the pickup locations. If you have any questions, you can contact the Recreation Department at 301-891-7290. And the other event that is also in the morning on October 3rd is the Walk to School movement in Tacoma Park. This is a nationwide activity, actually I guess an international activity that takes place on October 3rd. Tacoma Park is participating with great organization this year. The Tacoma Park Safe Routes to School program is organizing the event, and if you want more information about it, you can contact Lucy Neer here at the city department, the city building. Her phone number is 301-891-7220 or 301-891-7235. People are encouraged to, parents are encouraged to walk their children to school that day, and there will be events at most of the schools upon arrival. Thank you.
I want to remind folks that the nominating caucus is tomorrow. Come and have some fun. Tomorrow night here in the auditorium. The second thing I want to remind folks is that on October 10th, beginning at 6 p.m., there'll be a lot of fun at a Purple Line Now event. If you need more information, come up and see me afterward, or you can check out on the web. This is a really important activity, is getting the Purple Line built. The other thing I wanted to say is that the deadline for comments to the Tacoma Metro site development are coming up later this week. I think it's the 5th is when they have to
Friday
be
the
in.
5th,
Yeah.
yes, at 2 p.m. You have
Two-
to say 2 p.m. because they're closing it before the close of business.
Right, very clever on their part. Please get your comments in. And the last thing I wanted to mention is I have heard indirectly, I haven't had a chance to check this out, but I'm pretty sure it's true, that the Washington Adventist Hospital has delayed its application for a certificate of need. The sort of layman's meaning of that is that the pace at which they will be moving out of Tacoma Park is slowed substantially by that, because it means that they are not ready to move ahead. And even on the most optimistic time frame that I got, it was going to be 5 years before they would move. And with this delay, it pushes it back even more. Gives the community an opportunity to have more thought and attention to either keeping them here under one model or another, or coming up with alternatives for the site if they do decide to move, and with more time to work on it. I think that will benefit everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, I have two things. First one is wanted to make sure that everybody remembers that this Sunday, October 7th, is the Street Festival in Old Town. I'm not sure of the hours. It must be something like 11 to 6.
Usually is, yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to point out to my colleagues that there's a item that is on the desk, and it's entitled Green Fund. And this is information that comes from the Maryland Municipal League to me as a member of the Legislative Committee, and this provides us for a number of opportunities to get feedback on potential bills at the state. And this first one is the new Green Fund. It's different than last year's version. The difference is there is no priority funding application with it. It's more of a model on the flush tax of 2004. Money's collected on a per square foot basis on all existing residential and commercial development, and there's no smart growth or priority funding application nexus, so there's no guarantee that monies would come back to particular local governments directly. If you look at the sheet, It has a way to distribute the revenues with 50% going to the Maryland Department of the Environment to distribute to local governments for things like stormwater utilities, specific stormwater management projects, local urban tree buffer and stream restoration projects, and technical assistance for local governments to implement stormwater management. So this is something that it would be good to get input on if we have any ideas about ways to change or improve it. The feedback on these things has to get back fairly fast, so if anybody has any comments, if you can get them to me, I will send back our comments this week. And this should be the first in a number of updates that I'll be giving on these.
Any other council members would like to make comments? Okay, we will go into the next item on the agenda. There are no additional agenda items. So the next item is the public comment period. This is the time set aside on the council's agenda for anything that's not on our special session agenda. The particular items on our special session agenda, we will allow public comments at the time they come up. But if there's anything on a work session agenda or anything else you'd like to speak to, we'd welcome you to come forward at this time. I'd ask when you come to speak to the council, either now or at a later time, if you would identify yourself when you come up to the podium, and if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park. That's also Franklin Apartments, Ward 4. I also want to remind you to tell everybody that we've only got 36 days until we vote. We vote for our council members and our mayor. You know, and I want to also tell everybody, anyone who's listening, to please come out to the nominating caucus tomorrow night. I want to see as many people out there from Ward 4 as possible. Also, people have been asking me, what is the deadline to register to vote in the city elections?
October 8th, I believe.
What is it?
Am I right? October 8th.
October the 8th. So people, you haven't got that much longer out there to get up off your keisters and get out there and register to vote. You can't complain if you don't vote. So if you want to have a good council, come on out there and vote for him. I know who I'm voting this year, Terry Siemens. He's my council member, and I hope he always stays my council member. You know, and I'll be seeing him tomorrow at the caucus anyway. So the second thing I want to address is the dogs, pit bulls. I know a lot of people who have some really nice pit bulls. It's how they are raised. If you raise them and treat them with dignity from the time they're a pup on, they are a very loving dog. If you don't mind being licked all over the face by one, fine, you know. But and I do think, you know, when people are attacked by dogs, we should make the homeowner responsible for their dog, no matter what breed it is, no matter what pet they have. If they cannot be responsible for their pet, they should not have their pet. If a dog mauls somebody, it doesn't matter if it's a pit bull, whether it's a Rottweiler or it's a Great Dane. If you cannot be responsible for your dog, you should pay. The city should have a law that the homeowner is responsible for that. He's responsible for the medical needs afterwards. That's the way I think it should be done. I don't think we should ban any single dog, because that spreads fear and misinformation about the particular animal. I'd like to see the city get somebody in here who is an expert on dogs. Maybe that somebody from ASPCA can come in and address us. I'd love that. But I'd hate to see one breed banned, and also I don't like the idea of giving people's phone numbers out. That's not a peaceful way to answer the issue. I would like to see a much more relaxed and much more, you know, mature way of dealing with this. Make the homeowners responsible for their pets. People can die from a cat injury too. You can get clogged by a cat and die of an infection. That the homeowner should be responsible for their pet. I don't care what it is, a snake, a dog, or whatever it is. And but banning a pit bull is not going to solve the big problem. It's just going to solve one breed not being able to attack it. But it's also going to cheat a lot of people out from the pleasure of knowing the truth about these animals, and also spread fear of animals. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you.
And remember, I want everybody out there in Ward 4 to vote for Terry Siemens and come out to the caucus. October 8th. Come on out and register to vote. Be an American in Tacoma Park. Vote.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Yes, if you want to come up to the podium here.
I hope there's no problem, Madam Mayor, if I take more than 3 minutes. If there is, let me know.
Okay, could you identify yourself for us?
Yes, my name is George J. Molesky. I live on Holly Avenue,
Thank you.
and I'd like to give you a little background. Last time I saw you, Madam Mayor, you were sitting in one of the other chairs. So
That was obviously a long time ago.
That's been a long time. I'm concerned about several things, and I know for you people up there, this is old hash, but bear with me. Because a lot of this stuff I haven't been reading in the papers. Two of the items is that I now understand Tacoma Park is a sanctuary city,
Yes.
and I suppose this means we are not enforcing the law of the land.
We're not enforcing laws for the immigration and,
Illegal immigrants, illegal.
we don't enforce the federal immigration laws.
All right, that was my name. May I ask you why, the rationale for it?
Well, there's a number of rationales for it. One of those is that we want to preserve a good relationship with all of our residents, whether they're immigrants or not. And immigrants don't always understand that people are going after only people who are undocumented.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. I'm concerned about the illegals. Immigrants, I have no
Well,
problems with immigrants.
you make that distinction.
My grandfather was, okay?
You make that distinction, but they don't always. And so that you cause fear in the immigrant community if you start reporting people to the INS. This is particularly important, I think, in the area of law enforcement, because we need to have a good relationship with the immigrant community if we want to solve crimes that happen in the immigrant community. And so it's important for us to have that good relationship.
Okay, that was my, I want to go on to this law enforcement later, Madam Mayor. I'm sure you understand that the city will lose Homeland Security funds,
I don't believe we will, no.
and why not? It's in the law,
However, we haven't had that problem so far.
but it's coming. It's the law.
I can't really speculate on what we would do, so I can't answer that question.
Well, I'm concerned if you lose money, how do we make up for it? You raise our taxes?
As I said, since it hasn't happened, I don't really know the answer to that question.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. But my biggest worry, Madam Mayor, is the restrictions. I read this article in Washington Times where our police chief, he cannot cooperate with the federal law enforcement departments on illegal immigration warrants. How did this come about?
That is an outgrowth of our sanctuary city law, and I should note that the police chief is going to come before the council, I believe it's on the 15th, at least it's tentatively scheduled on the 15th,
gonna
to
be here?
discuss, come here in an open session, to discuss that issue with us further. The council definitely wants to hear from him, and we will give him a hearing on that day. Discuss whether the council wants to change, make some changes to the law according to the concerns that the chief has.
I see.
So that'll be probably on the 15th.
On the 15th, I'll mark that down. Same time as
Yes, 7:30.
7:30?
I'm not sure where on the list it comes.
Okay. Well, this is the problem that I'm concerned about. What happens to our men and women in blue, our police personnel? What happens if some of them get injured, and I hate to think of the other problems of getting maimed or even killed? Is the city open for a lawsuit because of your laws regarding this sanctuary city business?
I don't see how we would increase the likelihood of injury if the sanctuary city policy would increase the likelihood of injury. The city obviously covers our law enforcement personnel that are injured in the line of duty under, the other kinds of insurance that we already have. We cover them now, and we would continue to do so.
Well, I take it that if they're injured, you have some kind of insurance for them?
Yes.
Stuff like that? But I'm
Yes.
talking about lawsuits. Have you considered that? Are you saying that you will not get any lawsuits from it?
I would never guarantee you that we would not get lawsuits on anything. I can tell you we've gotten lawsuits on every imaginable issue, and that will probably continue to be the case.
If I can just add that I think that area will be part of the discussion that we have with the chief.
Okay. Well, like I say, when I heard about this, I thought, I was outraged, thinking, that we're putting ourselves in harm's way, especially having a bunch of illegals on the street, and you don't know what their backgrounds are, whether they have a rap sheet back in Guatemala or Mexico or even another state. I'm not comfortable having these people roaming the streets and we know absolutely nothing about them. I'd like to just tell you how.
Okay. Can you wind up, can you summarize at this point?
Yeah, well, I just want to tell you that I came here with my family from overseas assignment 4 years, and we moved here in November of '67. So I saw a lot of changes coming about since then. When I got here, it was a nice, quiet southern town, and but it's not happening now. We're getting all of these problems, which I don't think is quite necessary. But you did answer some of the questions, and I appreciate it. But I hope that someone looks into this business of lawsuits. I'm sure by the time you get done paying these bills, it's going to break the bank.
Well, thank you for your comments, and I would encourage you to come back on the 15th, where this will be an issue that we're discussing with the police chief, and many of the concerns that you've raised will be discussed at that time.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and the other people. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not quite like the last time I was here. It was a cast of thousands, and they were all short and cute. The students were here. I'm Kay Daniels Cohen. I live at 19 Sherman Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland, and have been a resident actually, the house has been owned by my family since 1946. So I'm coming to you as the acting president of the S.S. Carroll Neighborhood Association. It was a viable and busy association about 10 years ago for 4 or 5 years, and then I guess went to computers, and I came back into the city a year ago, and I decided we'd raise this puppy up from the wires of the computer systems, and we've had our third meeting where we're actually human beings in a room meeting together, which is pretty nifty. And we've had some good attendance. It's not like the students here at the last meeting I was at, but it's still been good. What I'm bringing to you tonight is, this is a letter from the Citizens Association from me as the acting president. Dear Mayor Porter and City Council, as acting president of the S.S. Carroll Neighborhood Association, I request that a task force, oh, love that word, be put together to address the traffic issues, another great word, surrounding the Tacoma Park Junction area. Our hope is that this task force make the junction function, should include a representative from the following groups. And I think we've covered 10 groups. Engineering, Old Tacoma Business Association, S.S. Carroll Neighborhood Association, B.F. Gilbert Citizens Association, the individual property owners on Carroll Avenue and Ethan Allen Avenue, one representative from them. Mass Transit, one of the bus drivers who actually drives the routes that go across Carroll and Ethan Allen, said he would be interested in volunteering his time to talk about what he thinks might work. Safe Roadways Committee, Renters Association, I may not have that as a correct association, but Historic Tacoma Inc. and Historical Tacoma Inc. and the Public Safety Committee. The purpose of such a task force will be to explore solutions to the multitude of problems that surround the area known as the Junction. Pedestrian safety, and it's always been an issue. I've been here since '46. You couldn't get across Carroll Avenue then. It's still just got to be a bit patient. Businesses, parking, public transportation, stops, traffic, vehicle flow, etc. We'd like to have this task force put together no later than December 1st, and have a scheduled meeting right after the first of the year. Our goal is to achieve a solution to the array of traffic problems facing the junction, which can be put into place upon the completion of the fire station project or soon thereafter. We are aware that we've got, once the fire station deal starts, we probably have close to 2 years before that traffic is not going to be just a scrambled egg. Hello. We're prepared a list of several viable ideas to forward this goal to be presented at the first task force meeting. And I'm just requesting that if you can direct where I go to get this going and how we can do it and work together as a group, I'd be happy. And I have letters that I'm going to give to your city clerk.
That's great. I think that's a fine idea. My guess is it will probably come before the next council, not this one.
Got it.
Because this council will only be meeting until the end of the month.
Right.
But I think it's a fine idea. Of course, I won't be on the next council, but I think it's a fine idea, and I would very strongly suggest that you speak to your candidates for mayor and council member, but I think it probably would be well received.
Okay, and I'll do that. I knew, the time is now,
Right.
just do it, all that.
I appreciate it, and I think it's a great idea. Thank you for bringing it to us.
You're welcome. And I have to say, I did live 30 years in Prince George's County, which was a county. My mom and dad had the house. I want to thank all of you for my ability as a member of the community to have the opportunity to come and say anything, not anything, but speak my mind
say it.
about what goes on in the city. And it may not always be my way, but this is not how it is everywhere in Montgomery County, certainly, and nor in the state of Maryland. So I really appreciate that, what you all do. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I'll give the letter to your city clerk.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Anyone else? All right, seeing no one else. Does the city manager have an update?
Yeah, just a few items. I realize that we're running a little bit behind schedule, and we have some honored guests here this evening to be recognized. Just a few items I wanted to mention to the council. As I had advised you a few weeks ago, PowerMax, who was a subcontractor to James F. Knott Construction, had filed a lawsuit against the city regarding the release of some retainage, and I believe I may have mentioned to the council at that time that we would be meeting with PowerMax to see if there was a way to kind of work amicably through this matter. A meeting did take place approximately 2 weeks ago. It does appear that we may have a resolution to that issue without resorting to litigation, and we're trying to put dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but hope I'll have a little bit more information for the council in the next week or two. I also wanted to update the council on the work to the Maple Avenue Bridge sidewalk, which we had talked about a few weeks ago as well. Work is scheduled to begin tomorrow, Tuesday, October 1st, and we have reached agreement on the scope of work to be performed by the contractor, which is Highway and Safety Services, and the city has given a notice to proceed as of tomorrow. Would like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to Washington Adventist Hospital, which plans to allow the contractor to use a portion of their property for the actual staging of the work. And we have reached agreement on that. The city will be installing some signage at the request of the contractor indicating that the work is being done under the management of the city. So there's clarification in terms of who is the contracting party. The work is expected to take approximately 3 to 4 weeks to be completed, and certainly we recognize as a staff that this is an important pedestrian walkway for many residents of the city, and as soon as the work is completed, we will be reopening that sidewalk and keep the council updated as the project moves along. But we are expecting it to be closed for another 3 to 4 weeks. I also wanted to take this opportunity to update the council on the resident survey. Had spoken to the firm that is conducting the survey on behalf of the city this morning to get an idea of kind of how things were going. They have already mailed out kind of the second wave of the surveys. As you may recall, there's kind of a multi-mailing process. They indicated that as of the end of last week, they had received 400 surveys back, which actually they consider to be a fairly good number.
Out of how many sent?
3,000, but basically they don't expect everything to come back with the timing of the mail. In today's mail, there was a reminder postcard kind of sent out to the individuals who have received it, and basically the they'll start actually doing some data collection later this month, but they usually allow at least another couple weeks with mailing time and recognizing that people don't drop everything they're doing and fill out their survey immediately. Based on the timeline we have right now, I anticipate that the report would be finalized and probably presented to the new council shortly after the first of the year. Just we're getting into that kind of time frame where the council is not meeting. The last item I just wanted to mention, Councilmember Siemens had sort of touched on this a little bit, is the Walk to School event that is taking place on Wednesday. A few weeks ago, I had asked the council for an opportunity in the near future to talk a little bit about the hanging of banners on the railings of the community center. I know there had been some concern and different points of view of whether or not that's sort of folksy and community-oriented, or it kind of diminishes the appearance of the building. And I know the council indicated it would like to have some discussion of that issue at the earliest opportunity. I did receive a request to see if we could, actually from a member of our staff, if we could hang a banner about the Walk to School event on Wednesday, and in the absence of any specific direction from the council to the contrary, I went ahead and gave that go-ahead. From a timing standpoint with Public Works, the banner needed to be hung this afternoon, and it will be taken down at the end of the workday on Wednesday. I didn't want to let the council know I wasn't trying to preclude any discussion, but this was an event that came up before the council had an opportunity to take any action on it. Is there any questions about anything, and these matters or any other? I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Any questions for the city manager?
Thank you.
I don't see any. All right. We will now move on to the first item on our agenda. And the first item on our agenda is a special one this evening. We have a resolution recognizing Dave Lorenz for his contributions to the arts and the Tacoma Park community. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to read this resolution. It's sort of long, but it's not too long. Whereas Dave Lorenz and his wife, Juanita Coos Lorenz, are leaving Tacoma Park this fall to retire to a small country town in Pennsylvania. And whereas Mr. Lorenz has been a member of the Tacoma Park Symphony Orchestra since 1989, serving as the TPSO's librarian, as well as program editor and concert producer for orchestral and chamber music. He also co-founded the TPSO Board of Directors and served as president from 1996 to 2004. And under his supervision, the TPSO made money in its first 7 seasons. And whereas he founded the Tacoma Park Jazz Fest in 1999, since then he has been the Jazz Fest executive producer, president, and grant writer. And whereas Mr. Lorenz joined the Tacoma Park Folk Festival in 1994 and served on the board of directors and as a food coordinator, he remained a member until 1999. And whereas in 1999, Mr. Lorenz was appointed to the First Citizens Committee, which reviewed potential locations and designs for the new Tacoma Park Community Center. And both he and Ms. Coos Lorenz served on various advisory committees that contributed to the final design and construction of the community center. And whereas in 2003, Mr. Lorenz was appointed to the advisory board of a dormant local funding foundation to help revive the Tacoma Foundation, where he helped to plan a strategy to raise funds for the new Tacoma Park Community Center and other community needs. And whereas Mr. Lorenz was appointed by the City Council to the Tacoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission from 2003 to 2004, he was elected by the Commission to the office of Second Vice Chairman. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and residents, that we thank Dave Lorenz for his many contributions to the arts in our community and wish him well in his new home. And I'd like to move this. Does somebody want to
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. And I just want to say a couple things. What we're going to do is we will ask for comments on the resolution, if there's any public comments. And then the council will take a vote, and then after the vote, if Dave or Juanita want to say anything, we'll give you the opportunity to do that. Before that, we will have a presentation. But I guess I met Dave Lorenz, I guess when you were working with the Tacoma Park Symphony Orchestra. One thing about Dave is he's not particularly shy. If he needs something from the city, he's very forthcoming about saying so. And he made my acquaintance to let me know things the Tacoma Park Symphony Orchestra needed. And I always felt like I had very good communication with him. He also was the founder of the Jazz Fest, which has become, I guess, the third or fourth, perhaps, of the city's big annual festivals. And it's not very easy to get a new festival going, particularly in Tacoma Park, where there are several already. But through great determination, he got the thing up and on its feet and going. I have to say, the Jazz Festival had the worst weather luck I have ever seen for any festival that the city's gone. I think it rained, 6 of the first 7 seasons, or some number like that. It seemed to suffer a lot of rainy days on the days of the Jazz Festival. But they persevered, and now it's pretty well instituted as Tacoma Park's big spring festival. Dave and Juanita were both very, very active in the both funding and getting the new Tacoma Park Community Center pulled together. So there have been lots of efforts in the community that both of them have worked on, and now they are retiring to Pennsylvania, to a farm, sort of should I say farmhouse? It's a farmhouse in look, but it is in a small town. And somehow I doubt that their retirement will be all that quiet. I've already heard about some of the plans that they have for various things that they might get involved in, and so I'm sure that their retirement will be as active as their non-retirement in Tacoma Park has been. So we thank Dave and Juanita for your help and for all you've done for the arts in Tacoma Park, and wish you well, and hope you will come back and see us every so often, even after you're settled in your new home. So is there anyone else who would like to say anything? Bruce, and then...
Yeah, just, I first met Dave in fall of 1993, because he was running for city council and I was running for city council. And...
we didn't put that on the resolution.
No. Well, the resolution was about the arts, and some could argue that maybe being on the city council is not an art. But it's been great having you in the city, and all the efforts you've put into all the things that were enumerated in the resolution. And I also know that you have some interest in banners, and we're in the process of going through a discussion on that, so we'll miss your input on that. But it's been great to have you here, and I know you'll be back.
Dave, Juanita, I first met Dave when I first became involved in active in community issues in Tacoma Park, and I established a relationship with Dave at that time that really has kind of characterized activism in Tacoma Park for me. He is involved in everything. He is strong in his beliefs and willing to step forward and state his beliefs. And I just admire the work that Dave has done. And in more recent years, as I came to know Juanita and see them work as a unit on the Jazz Festival and the Community Center, the other things that are listed here. And I would tell people it's much more than what's just listed here in the resolution. They've been involved in, I think, everything that is Tacoma Park. And it's sad to see you all leaving and going to Pennsylvania, but I'm really kind of interested to hear what takes place when you end up in this small town in Pennsylvania and they find out who their new residents are, and the fact that you're not really retiring at all in any sense of the word, that you'll be up there trying to enhance that community as you've done here in Tacoma Park. And thank you, and also we welcome you back any time to continue to keep our Jazz Fest going and helping to some of the council members on the next council appreciate the banners that need to be displayed here in this small town atmosphere and the folksy nature that we want this town to have. Thank you.
Are there any public comments on the resolution? Does anyone want to comment on the resolution?
Yes, I'd just like to say something real quick. My name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue.
Right.
You're there.
A little left, a little left.
To the left.
Go forward.
All right.
There you go.
Here I am, found myself. Okay, my name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue. And I like it when you guys show appreciation for for our citizens and our people are doing it here in Tacoma Park. It really does give us a small town American feel to the city. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're young or you're old, or whether you're an immigrant or a non-immigrant, or when you really think about it, we're all immigrants. We stole the land off the Indians, don't forget. But it doesn't matter who we are. We all have something to offer the city. And thank you, Mr. Lorenz, for what you've been doing with music. And keep up the good work, and I wish you a lot of luck in Pennsylvania. And don't forget to keep in touch with our city. You know, once a Tacoma Parker, always a Tacoma Parker. You can take the person out of Tacoma Park, but you cannot take Tacoma Park out of the person. Don't forget it. And thank you very much for showing your appreciation, City Council. Thank you.
Okay. Is it, let me see. Any other public comments? Okay. Oh, did you want to have a comment? Sure.
Hi, I'm Paul Long, and I've known Dave and Juanita for about 11 years now. I've been associated with Jazz Fest during that time, and it's hard for me to speak of one without the other because they're held together like a covalent bond, I think, and hard to separate. Frankly, since I've been rather closely related to the Jazz Fest, I don't know how they do it all. It's absolutely amazing that it's essentially a two-person operation with some ancillary help on the side. It's going to be quite a gap not having them here. Although I have high hopes for our new producer, Bruce Cromer. It's going to be very difficult not having them here. They're good friends, and I shall miss them. And I appreciate it. They can do pretty much anything they set their minds on doing. And that's it.
Well, thank you. Anyone else wanted to make a comment? Okay, I think Bruce had something he wanted to add.
I just recalled one other thing that I think was a real example of how Dave and Juanita share themselves with the community. After they got married, they brought part of their wedding cake back and brought it into City Hall and shared it with folks, and it was very good, and it was a very nice thing to do.
Okay. The resolution is before the council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes unanimously. Now, would you like to come up, Dave and Juanita too, if you want to, and come up and we'll do the formal presentation? This is the photo op that goes with the resolution. Here you go. Don't trip over the. You have to stand in the middle here under the seal. Thank you. We really appreciate everything, and thank you to Juanita. Thank you very much. So if you want to get a picture here, we have to do the thing here. Okay, great. Thank you both very much. And do keep in touch. And if there's anything you'd like to say, we'll give you an opportunity to do that. You want to go down to the microphone so you can actually be heard by the folks at home?
Well, friends in Tacoma Park, friends on City Council, friends everywhere, thank you very much for this honor. And we're moving to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, about 25 miles past Hagerstown. And it's not a small town. It's the same size and about the same population as Tacoma Park. It takes up about the same area of land, although it doesn't look like as much like a squash to me, but as Tacoma Park does. I have been I came to the D.C. area in 1973 to help build Metro. Immediately joined the Ironworkers Union, Local 5, and I've been making my living that way ever since. 17 stations and a bunch of other things, including the tallest building in the D.C. area until we finish that big job down past the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And it's been a blast being in Tacoma Park. It's been invigorating and infuriating, and there have been many things that I've loved about it most of the time, and a few things that have really gotten my dander up. It seems like in Tacoma Park, any group of 4 people, there are about 6 different opinions, and as the producer of the Jazz Fest and also the concert producer of Tacoma Park Symphony Orchestra before that, it's the job of the producer basically to coordinate everything, and much of this involves knowing everybody who is anybody who can help the effort. And as a result, I've been acquainted with pretty much the heads of all the departments here at the city. Until recently, everybody on City Council. I'm sorry there are a few of you that I haven't had the opportunity really to get to know. But on the other hand, I've known that sooner or later, an inveterate traveler has to get back on the road again, at least for the 100 miles up to Chambersburg. But it is an hour-and-a-half drive for me, and if there weren't the cops on the road, I could probably arrive there about a half an hour before I left here. So I definitely will be back. I've got to make sure that, in the Jazz Fest bylaws, we have something that pretty much says once a board member, always a board member, and so they can't keep me out, and just got to keep these people on their toes. You heard from Paul, our president of the board, and Bruce Cromer, the new producer. We knew that he could do the job because he has done it twice already when I tried to hand the thing to him before. But there are going to be some changes, and you'll see how the Jazz Fest is going to grow and proceed and change. But at any rate, I've been here for 33 years, and I want to thank everybody for an energetic period of time that long, and a major period of my life. I've never lived anywhere as long as here, but it's time to continue the move that I've been a traveler all my life, and I can't understand how I've been here this long. But at any rate, so again, thank you to everybody, and you haven't seen the last of me.
Well, thank you.
Oh, and by the way, our beautiful house is for sale, so Hank Prensky is the man to contact for that.
Okay, great. Juanita, would you like to say anything?
I just would like to say thank you for the opportunity to sort of grow and blossom with all the committees that were available, the citizens committees with, the new community center and the Tacoma Foundation, of which I was secretary of the board of. And let me use this opportunity to put in a plug for the Tacoma Foundation. If any business owners or individuals or families are listening, the website is tacomafoundation.org, and the Tacoma Foundation does a lot of work. But as far as the Jazz Fest, I met Dave in 1995 when he was founding the Tacoma Park Jazz Fest,
And at that point, I was really happy to meet him, except this is kind of a silliness. He threw my number out, and I wasn't calling him, and I ended up calling him because I was in College Park, involved at age 35 with the student group SAVE, Students Against Violence Everywhere, and we were trying to get a peace studies major on campus. And this may seem irrelevant, but the only reason why I'm here with Dave today is he threw my phone number out, but I called him to invite him to a SAVE meeting. And he said, I just thought you were kind of young or not interested in me. And, well, we found out we had a lot in common, a real lot in common. And I was happy to meet Dave because my life had progressed to the point where I was involved with SAVE and I was trying to work with people. That was because I was a Buddhist and I told people they could chant for world peace and individual happiness, the Nam Myoho Renge Kyo phrase. And I had been in College Park for 10 years for my American Studies major, so not only did Dave and I have a lot in common, but the jazz had, and I felt like I resonated with this person because I could use my American Studies degree and learn a whole lot about jazz, a great American art form. But I am really glad that Tacoma Park had all these committees and festivals and just everything for me to participate in, including the TPSO, the Symphony Orchestra. And that went in with my music classes that I had taken years before. But I've learned a lot with Dave, and if somebody had told me 26 years ago when I got my bachelor's degree that I would enjoy selling ads to raise money to pay musicians, I would have said, I don't think so. But my life's experiences and my chanting and just everything, you know, growing older with Dave, we're 15 years apart, I'm sure we'll find a lot of opportunities, but I really appreciate the wonderfully great honor. Thank you, Mayor Porter, and all the council people for making all of this possible, and all the city staff, and also all the artists and crafters and advertisers. Please continue to support the Jazz Fest, because we do pay the musicians and we rely on contributions and ad sales and grant writing and just a whole bunch of things. So thank you all very much, and I really appreciate having grown and developed myself with Dave and had a whole bunch of opportunity. Thank you very much. So thank you. Well, thank you both, and we wish you all the best. The next item on the agenda is a resolution supporting civil marriage legislation in Maryland. And for the council members, it's the piece of, it's the resolution that's sitting up at the desk. The one you have in your packet is actually the one that we passed a couple of years, I guess 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And Bruce helped draft the resolution, and so I guess I'll turn it over to him if he has anything else he wants to say.
Yeah. First, if I can move the resolution.
Second.
This, I felt we needed to do something to recognize that the Maryland Court of Appeals denied the appeal in the case from 1994 seeking to legalize civil marriage in Maryland. And that's the one, that's the previous resolution that's in the packet, that's the long one. And what I want to do is make sure that that one kind of gets associated with this one, because that has a lot of the details. And this one basically just recognizes that even though the city has had a domestic partnership registry since 1993, that doesn't address the hundreds of rights automatically conferred in federal and state law through marriage, and that the problem with the ruling in this case was that it essentially goes back and says separate but equal is okay, and I think a lot of us felt that the U.S. had gotten beyond that decades ago. Another one of the areas that the ruling got into that I think they didn't really need to get into at all was that they were essentially saying that marriage is to encourage procreation, and I would like them to tell that to all the senior citizens who get married in their 70s, 80s, and sometimes 90s. I don't think that procreation is necessarily something that people are expecting out of those relationships. And finally, that civil marriage is not in any way attempting to have any religion subject to approving of marriages that they don't want to approve of. Civil marriage really has nothing to do with religious marriage, and they're entirely separate issues. And so this is essentially to say to our District 20 delegates and to the General Assembly and to the Governor that this is something which, as the judges said, is a matter for the legislature to decide. So they should do the right thing and allow civil marriage in Maryland.
I understand that there are over 1,100 rights that are accorded to folks who are legally married, and I just want to talk about 3 of those. I think one of the things that's most disturbing to me is to know that if my partner were to get sick and was in the hospital, they could actually deny me the right to go and visit her. You don't get to make any decisions about what happens to people after they die or participate that in any way. Another issue is that it's really difficult to provide insurance for your partners. When we lived in California, we were lucky because the state of California allows domestic partners to insure somebody else in their home. And my partner worked for the University of California at San Francisco, and for a while I was unemployed, it was great to have that kind of insurance. Now I work for the federal government, and my partner is between jobs, and I can't provide her with insurance. And that just doesn't make sense to me. I should be able to pay to get insurance for her. And the third thing is that it has an effect on what happens to my children, because there are issues of inheritance and other issues that are related to those kinds of things that have a huge impact on families. We stayed in California because of the laws that were there until we had the kids that we were going to have, and we have 2 kids, and we're both legal parents of both of the children, and we can take that with us to any state that we go to, and you can't take that away from us. But for people who don't have that in far less progressive states than California or Maryland, that has a huge impact on those kids and their access to resources and the kinds of family fights that ensue when one or both parents is no longer around. And those are the kinds of things that I think are always surprising, even to people who are very supportive of the idea of civil marriage. They don't always understand the degree to which gay and lesbian people are excluded from equal participation in society and all of the things that we pay taxes for and participate in as well. Thank you.
I feel very strongly about this also. I'm not going to repeat what is already in the previous resolution, but I do want to say that I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, and our Quaker meeting over in Adelphi has recognized religious marriages of same-sex couples for many, many years. And I was privileged actually to perform such a ceremony. The couple asked me to, it's called clerking, but sort of officiating at this ceremony. And it was an absolute delight to do it. It was a wonderful ceremony, and it brought the entire meeting together. Hundreds of people came, and this young couple is, in my mind, married as much as any heterosexual couple. And the community is supporting them as much as we can in trying to bring the rights of marriage to them, all the other rights as you were indicating. And to me, it's just unconscionable. And my own personal reaction to this is that when I've learned this in other areas of life, that when people are discriminated against, it affects It affects everybody. It's not just gays and lesbians that are affected. I am diminished by that, and I really find that offensive because there is no, as far as I can tell, no reason not to go ahead with civil marriage. It's just completely amazing to me that we haven't done it. So I fully support this. We'll work quite hard if I can to urge our legislators in Annapolis to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I think when resolutions such as this come before the council here in Tacoma Park, that people think that it's an easy decision and something that's going to just pass without much discussion. But for people who know me well, know that I'm very involved in my church, my religion, and this is obviously a topic that has religion aspect to it, a religious aspect to it. You know, my religion teaches me that same-sex relationships are not right. But at the same time, my religion teaches me, it's much more robust. It teaches me many other things, and that's part of what makes life a challenge, especially when one tries to follow the religious teachings that we believe in. My religion teaches me not to judge other people and to accept other people for who they are. I struggled with this resolution, and at one point I decided that I was going to abstain from voting on it, and it didn't take long to think about that and realize that was the coward's way out. I'm here, I'm elected to represent my neighborhood and to make decisions and to vote my mind. And as I look at the resolution as it's written, it's in support of civil marriage legislation in Maryland. This is not talking about what churches should be doing. This is talking about civil marriage. And the points that I've heard made here tonight, especially very eloquently from Councilmember Clay, about the discrimination factors that people face because of some of the laws, and weighing in my religious beliefs, I think that that the better good is done in supporting this resolution, and therefore I'm going to vote for the resolution in support of civil marriage. Thank you.
Anyone who's had the opportunity of experiencing the love that same-sex couples have for each other, and particularly where children are involved, know then how ridiculous and unjust it is to deprive these men and women and their children the right to civil marriage. The resolution tonight is consistent with the position that the Council has taken over the past several years, and I'm somewhat encouraged to note that the opinion of the High Court leaves the door open for a legislative remedy to this great injustice and lack of civil rights. And of course, the civil rights movement, which involved the extension of free equal rights to people of all color, took a very long time to finally resolve. And maybe it's not surprising that it's taking time for courts and legislators and members of the public to struggle with this civil right. But I'm hopeful that it won't take as long, because I'm hopeful that we've learned a lot about denying people basic civil rights, and I think the right to civil marriage is one of those rights, and I hope we will be able to find a legislative remedy for it in the near future.
Like Reuben, I had the honor of an opportunity to participate in a same-sex marriage several years ago, and at the request of the couple. And it was a marriage performed by a clergyman, and it was a religious marriage, but unfortunately had no, legal support. I think my colleagues have spoken very eloquently about the damage that the lack of a civil marriage structure has for people who are in same-sex partnerships. And I'd like to actually focus on a little bit of a different issue, which is the damage that the lack of civil marriage legislation has on society in general. It's always sort of puzzled me that since this society has spent hundreds of years working out the legal and the social and the medical relationships surrounding marriage, that we, having gone through all that and come up with a structure which exists, it may not be ideal, but at least it exists, that some people who are in committed relationships and in some cases even have children, society wants to go through and reinvent the wheel. And we've got a perfectly good structure for dealing with committed partnerships, including committed partnerships with children, and yet for these families, we choose not to apply it. And we choose to go through all the problems that are created when you have people in a family relationship, but a relationship that isn't recognized by any civil law. And so it seems to me just a matter of common sense. We have got families that need protection and structure. We've got a institution that provides that protection and structure for families like that. It seems just an issue of common sense that we ought to apply that structure to those families. And for the life of me, I don't understand why people think that there's any negative impact on other marriages in doing that. And so to me, and the argument that I'm going to continue to make, as in addition to the argument about rights, is just, for heaven's sake, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel when we've got a perfectly good remedy for all the issues that come up in these kinds of relationships? I'm sure hospitals and banks and, child care centers and schools would be very happy if we could resolve these issues with one fell swoop and say, okay, these are married partners and these are their children. That would end a lot of confusion and lack of structure. So it seems to me that this is just an obvious thing that we should support. Are there any public comments on this resolution? All right, seeing none, the resolution is before the council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the second reading of a previous ordinance awarding a contract for the fabrication and installation of interior building signage. We had the presentation on it. This is the second reading. I don't think we need to go through it again.
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions, comments? Did you want to say anything, Barb?
Yeah, it's, I was not here at the first reading of the ordinance, but it was my understanding there was some discussion and agreement by the council that a plaque should be installed in the community center.
Yes.
Recognizing former Mayor Abbott's contributions to the city. I just wanted to note that that is not addressed in the ordinance that is before you this evening. The staff envisions that this would be kind of a different type of plaque, and that will basically be handled as a separate procurement issue. So I didn't want the council to think that was forgotten about.
Okay, but it will come up.
That's correct.
Do you have an idea when it is due to come back?
The staff is doing some research on terms of the type of plaque that might be appropriate, and I think Councilmember Siemens had mentioned to me earlier this evening that he's had some discussions about some perhaps suggested language, so we'll try to get that back to the council hopefully before this council turns over, sometime within the next 30 days.
Okay, good. All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any public comments? Since this is the second reading of the ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter?
Aye.
Councilmember Austin Lane? Councilmember Barry?
Aye.
Councilmember Clay?
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper?
Aye.
Councilmember Williams?
Aye.
The ordinance passes its second reading. All right, the next item is an ordinance for replacement of the boiler. You may remember we did this, and Darrell will explain why we're doing it again.
Yes, it's not deja vu. After council's action on Monday evening, we contacted the lowest bidder and let them know of the approval for the contract award, and were informed that they had just received a huge contract from DC Public Schools, and all their efforts were going to be into installing boilers in the public school system in the District of Columbia. They estimated that they would be able to get to our job sometime within the next 6 weeks, leaving us somewhere into the middle of November. I didn't think that was an advisable route to go, given we're on the cusp here of a change in temperature, and several floors and offices are affected by the lack of heat. Our current boiler is inactive. It doesn't work at all. It's been deactivated. So we went to the next lowest bidder, which is a difference of a little over $3,000. They said that they would be able to install the boiler beginning the week of October 15th, and anticipated 2 to 3 week installation. So it's my recommendation that we make that move, albeit it is more expensive. However, the costs do come under what we had budgeted for that item. It happens sometimes in the length of time that companies submit their bid and then finally get notice from us. They make arrangements to do other business, and it sometimes works against us.
Particularly since this is DC Public Schools, and I do understand that getting things done sometimes results in delays, so that time frame you were given may have been optimistic.
Yeah, that was my sense as well.
Move the ordinance.
Okay.
Second.
Second it? Okay. Moved and seconded it. Any council comments or questions?
Thank you.
I think that the additional money is worth getting a more definite and sooner time frame. And we're still under the budgeted amount, we should know. Are there any public comments on this ordinance? We should note that this ordinance both repeals the previous ordinance and adopts the second lowest bidder. Since this is a single reading ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter?
Aye.
Councilmember Austin Lane? Councilmember Barry?
Aye.
Councilmember Clay?
Here. Oh, sorry, yes.
Sleep me.
Aye.
Yeah, it's an aye. That's right.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Snipper?
Aye.
Councilmember Williams?
Aye.
Okay. The single reading ordinance passes.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a resolution approving modifications to the Community Legacy Program application.
As noted in the cover memo, the council is being asked to consider this evening a resolution which would allow for restructuring of the budget of the original resolution that was presented to the City Council last week for the Community Legacy application. Between the time when the resolution was approved and the application was finalized, the numbers have changed fairly significantly in some areas. We're asking you to consider adoption of the resolution, allowing us to submit the application requesting $918,618 in grant funds. It would not change the order or the nature of the projects that were originally presented to the council at the work session a couple of weeks ago.
Could you, is there a way to quickly outline what the changes were?
Basically, with the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative, our original proposal was $200,000. We've added additional placemaking activities, which would increase that about $70,000. Again, that's all grant funding. For the Main Street program, that went from $200,000 to $205,000. There were some changes in the administrative costs associated with those two projects. Historic Tacoma was increased from $245,000 to the $250,000 to accommodate the financing fee which is required for the application. And then the neighborhood commercial area enhancements was increased from $180,000 to $189,000.
I would like to move the ordinance.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any council questions or comments? Are there any public comments on the resolution? All right, seeing none, the resolution is before the council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes.
Thank you.
Since we are running a bit late, my suggestion would be that the council take a short break and then we come back for all three of our work session items. There's a reason that we shouldn't do that other than we make you a little bit
I
later.
have one facade of brick would be nice.
Okay, we'll take a short break and come back for the facade advisory board.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, all right. The council will now proceed with its first work session item, which is the Facade Advisory Board's proposals. Those folks who are going to speak to us about the Facade Advisory Board's proposal want to...
Joining me this evening is Sabrina Barron, who serves as Historic Tacoma's representative on the Facade Advisory Board. As noted in the cover memo, the board has been going through and reviewing the design standards that it uses as it evaluates various projects which take place in Old Tacoma and in Tacoma Junction, which have an impact on the exterior appearance of the building. This can include everything from window replacement to sign replacement to, in some situations, landscaping improvements. As they've been going through the ordinance and developing guidelines that are appropriate for the area, it's been brought to their attention that some of the sign standards that currently exist in the ordinance are not appropriate for the area. They're focused primarily on the zoning ordinance and the zoning requirements. And in an effort to sort of move away from those basic zoning guidelines, which focus primarily on size and placement, they're attempting to move over into more general design standards that can be used to evaluate projects on a case-by-case basis. I believe the case that brought this to the forefront was when an individual wanted to put in one of those perpendicular hanging signs that you see in many historic areas, similar to to the Tacoma Historic District. The kind of
They hang over the street, perpendicular to the building, yeah.
And as a result of that, and because they were not technically permitted to authorize that or to recommend approval of that particular proposal to the Historic Preservation Commission, which reviews all of the applications and issues the required permits, the following guidelines that are included in your packet were developed. If you have any specific questions regarding that, Sabrina will be able to answer them.
Yeah, and if I could just say, I actually, as vice chair of the Facade Advisory Board, was presiding over the meeting where we drafted the language that you see here, as Jim O'Brien, who's the chair, was away at the time. And Sarah's exactly right. What we were trying to do primarily was to provide room for those perpendicular signs. We cannot be more liberal than the county code, but we can be more restrictive than the county code. And so that was the main concern, was the perpendicular sign, and then there were some concerns about lighting, and that lighting should shine down and toward the sign rather than up, and those kinds of concerns. But those were primarily the two criteria that we were working from.
I noticed that there's also a change in the structure of the I mean, it's laid. I mean, actually, I think it's laid out in a more understandable way. But I assume that was the reason for it.
Yeah.
It just sort of laid out so someone could understand it.
While we were at it, we thought we would just try to rationalize it as best we could. So.
Okay. Good.
I thought it all looked pretty good. The only one I had a question on was number 9, limited duration signs, and it talks about with the exception of standard G1B and G1J. I have no idea what that is.
That's from the county code, and it actually, you wouldn't believe how complicated signs of temporary duration are. The regulations under the county code, but we noticed that too, and it may be worth our while to put in a more explicit reference there to that this is to a section of county code that we're referring back to.
But it's difficult to say what that section
Right, and what we'll do
does
is
or talks about.
we'll specifically reference it. I believe it refers to the special exemption process that some signs of limited duration are required to secure.
So you would put in like words a little bit to explain what
Yeah, we could try that. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. The first one is about number 8 and the temporary signs. How does this affect things like the window displays that have been going in Taliano's lately, or what was there was a whole Barbie doll display that was part of one of the downtown activities, and then back when Kiki was in kindergarten or first grade, we did a downtown planning exercise with her class, and then the end results were these big posters that were mounted in the windows of different stores.
Well, my understanding of that, and I'll depend on Sarah, but my understanding of that is that that kind of window display doesn't constitute signage, and therefore is not covered by this.
Oh, okay.
So,
Then my second question is about freestanding signs. And so this would apply to signs, like I note that historic Tacoma, I'm just having trouble tonight. I note that the House of Musical Traditions has a
sandwich sign?
Yes, a sandwich board sign out in front of it almost continuously. And then we also have the joy of having a sign for Curves, and a couple of the other businesses that are around the corner on Westmoreland are perpetually planted in the public walkway and/or the public park area there.
Those kinds of issues have come up in our discussions, and in fact did come up in the discussions of rewriting the ordinance. And part of the issue there is that the Facade Advisory Board has advisory capacity, rather than any kind of code enforcement capacity. So, we've talked about that. In the past, the Facade Advisory Board has done things like send a letter, saying this is not really, in our bailiwick, but, could you please do something a little more attractive? So those things have come up in our discussions, and I think there is a general recognition that there's a need to address those kinds of sign questions in some way. And I think that's on our radar screen to do that.
The freestanding signs that are referenced in 7 are more like the standalone signs that you see in front of Victory Tower or
House of
Musical Traditions that are permanent. The sandwich boards, basically they're illegal. As Sabrina indicated, we generally just go and talk to the owner about not doing it anymore. Sometimes that's effective and other times it's not. We've tried to avoid taking a firmer position in terms of the enforcement of it as far as issuing a violation notice and things like that, because they will comply for a while.
Sure. But I think it's also different when you have a sign in front of your store and then when you have a sign in the public sidewalk or in the public park.
And it's also, that would also include the plastic banner things that you see tied to stuff, which is another, also has a different character than the sandwich boards, too. And surprisingly, they can be up there for an extended period of time based on
the
zoning ordinance. Yeah.
You can have a temporary sign for a year under the county ordinance,
regardless of where you're located. I know that Councilmember Berry has run into that in some of the properties in his ward, and it gets very frustrating, but it is permitted.
Is there anything within the ordinance here that can be done about the kind of temporary signage that we have for our festivals? Because I think last year I built 5 sandwich boards for the Tacoma Park Folk Festival, and I note that there's a sandwich board out right now for the Street Fest. And is there some kind of temporary licensing that we can do, or do we want to do that, or do you want to talk about that, or could you add that to the list of things that your committee talks about?
I think our inclination has sort of been not to get involved in that, because those kinds of signs are kind of a long-standing community tradition, and only 1 or 2 of those generally affect the area that the Facade Advisory Board is responsible for. So I think the inclination of the board has been to kind of back away from that. The other thing that's come up are, merchants who have one of their windows or part of their windows, like completely covered with community notices. Does that constitute signage, and should that be taken into consideration? And again, that's kind of a long-standing community tradition, so the inclination has been, kind of less is more, I guess, in terms of trying to get involved in regulating those kinds of things.
So that particular example is a good example of something that business owners are discouraged from doing from a crime prevention perspective, because you cannot see into the window. So if there's something going on, there's no foot traffic that can actually go in or look in and see that there's a situation going on that needs to be reported.
And the Main Street Design Committee also has an interest in these kinds of issues, and, you know, has been talking with different business owners in Old Town and the Junction about these very kinds of issues, and, you know, how that all plays into improving the streetscape of the Main Street corridor. So lots of people are thinking about it and trying to address it in more informal ways, I guess.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I really applaud you for the restructuring that you've done with the ordinance. It's much easier to follow and kind of more logical, and I, as an old computer person, I like logic. I wonder, though, and maybe you said it earlier, and I was not concentrating on your presentation, but I wonder what the, if you've articulated what the goals are of the sign ordinance?
Well, I mean, the particular goal for rewriting it was this particular issue of the perpendicular sign. But as I say, while we were at it, we were trying to clear up some other concerns and some other inconsistencies as we went about it. But
I guess my question's at the higher level of, you know, what's our purpose for having a sign ordinance?
Well, we want to make sure that everything is attractive. We want to make sure that everything conforms with county code. We want to make sure that nothing is dangerous, you know, that everybody adheres to the height limits, and, you know, under county code, signs can't move, or they can't have any moving parts, or, you know, they can't look like a person or an animal or anything like that. You know, so we want to make sure everything is attractive, cohesive, safe. We don't want to continue to contribute any more to light pollution. We want to try to, you know, make sure everything shines toward the sign or shines down, have been some of the concerns that we had. So, you know, overall, just a little more radicalization, consistency.
As I read these, the vast majority of them seem to be kind of good sign design requirements, that they aren't so much, although they may be rules because it's in an ordinance, it's things that people doing designs of signs, it's really kind of good advice for people too. But there are several things in here, though, that I wonder about, and I wonder because Tacoma Park is a pretty artsy community, and we have a lot of creative people, and there are some things in here such as on canopies, images and lettering should be confined to the vertical face. And I can see in an artist, you know, using a slope as part of a design that might be some of the lettering. Or items 12 and 13 on sign shape. I wonder, it says that they should be designed in simple, straightforward shapes. And I wonder if a shoe for a shoe store would be a although it might be a historically appealing shape for a sign, whether that would qualify under number 12. And again, there's an artistic quality that I think I could expect in Tacoma Park. And number 13, you know, restricting signs to 2 fonts. Again, that's a good design for not just signs, but also papers that people write or flyers they put out. But I could envision, you know, an artsy person for some kind of a printing shop, maybe wanting to use a variety of fonts and font sizes. And so I wonder if maybe this ordinance goes just a little too far into some things that would restrict the artists of our community.
Well, I'd have to go back and do a strict comparison for you, but it's my recollection that a lot of this stuff comes out of the county code, and that the county code is fairly restrictive. And as I say, we can be more restrictive in Tacoma Park, but we can't be less restrictive in Tacoma Park. And the thing, you know, the requirement that a sign can't take the shape of an animal or a person, that's county code. And we were very surprised to find those kinds of strictures in the county code. But, you know, if somebody wants to open up a barbecue joint and you want to, you know, have your sign in the shape of a pig or a cow or a chicken or whatever, by county code you can't do that. You know, so as I say, I'd have to go back and do an exact comparison to see what's what, but it's my recollection that a lot of this comes from county code, and it's beyond our control.
Okay, my feeling on this is I would defer to the facade committee, but I just hope that Roscoe the Rooster is safe from being banned.
If I might interject, a lot of it's interpretation as well. If you installed, for example, Roscoe the Rooster in front of a chicken shack, it doesn't necessarily have to be the sign. It could be interpreted as public art or statuary, something like that. So you have some flexibility within the guidelines that have been developed here, and a lot of it is in how it's presented and principally whether or not it's appropriate for the building. Some of the issues regarding the multitude of fonts that you could use and the sizes have a lot to do with the readability of it and also just promoting it as a business community. So if you have, for example, a lot of signs with tiny little letters and multiple fonts, the people that are driving down the street, for example, probably won't be able to read it and won't know what it is and aren't going to stop. So there's some of those issues to take into consideration. And there are also sort of maintenance kinds of things. I know what you're talking about in terms of having something kind of funky on the slopey part of the awning. Frequently, however, that's the part that fades the most quickly, and as a result, then you end up with sort of this thread
Funky
born, yeah, kind of funky part you don't want to necessarily enhance. So by having it on vertical elements, it really does reinforce or improves the longevity of that particular signage or design.
And Sarah's exactly right. I mean, that's one thing that there was a lot of discussion about. It was about making sure that the streetscape is not too busy, and that building numbers, street numbers, for example, are very visible and very readable. So that's a lot of what folks were concerned about, and there's a lot of attention. I mean, any sign that goes up, the design committee of Main Street quite often looks at it because they have facade improvement funding that people can apply for signage projects. The Facade Advisory Board looks at it. It's in the historic district. The HPC looks at it. So there's a lot of consideration, going into it. And I mean, we were very concerned about not making it burdensome to people, but just so that it's clean and it's rational and straightforward is what we were aiming for. And I think this stuff, like 75% of the total sign panel, I think that's a county requirement. And Jim O'Brien has a lot of experience as an architect in dealing with the county regulations, and he says that the county regulations are just incredible. It's what you have to deal with at the county level. So
I really thank you and the rest of the board for all the work that's obviously gone into this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, it sounds like the council's pretty happy with what you've got here. I also want to thank the advisory board, particularly thank you, Sabrina, as you chaired this piece of it, for doing this work and pulling it together. It certainly is more readable, and it sounds like it makes a lot more sense. And I'm sure it must have been quite a meeting to get everybody to agree on this. So
and we've been working on it for a while. And Sarah's office also, I think actually they're responsible for the new structure, which was a huge improvement, was getting it restructured. So
thank Boulder, Colorado.
Well, perhaps, but also our own staff and advisory board, I'm sure, had a lot to do with it, too. So,
this is tentatively scheduled for the first reading at the next meeting?
I think so, yes.
Yes, the next meeting. What we'll do is we'll expand the language in number 9 regarding the limited duration signs to make the reference more clear.
Okay. Did you want to do anything about clarifying? Let me see, what was the issue? There was an issue about freestanding signs. Did you want to do anything to clarify what it doesn't cover, or would you just rather leave that out? Okay, we'll leave it out. All right, good. I don't want to make trouble here.
Yes, we'd have to investigate further what Councilmember Clay is referring or is talking about, and there may be some enforcement challenges with that.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next item on our agenda is a proposed structure for living wage law. Does the city manager want to introduce this?
Yes, back in early July, the council held a work session to discuss the possible enactment of a living wage law. And at that time, the council discussed a number of different policy questions and reviewed the structure of some of the ordinances of other jurisdictions, either in the immediate area or in the state of Virginia, as well as the state of Maryland. And at the conclusion of that work session, there was a consensus on the part of the council to move forward with the adoption of a local living wage law. And in accordance with that direction, the staff prepared a draft ordinance for the council's consideration. Just hit some of the highlights. The council's direction was that they wanted the city's living wage rate to be equal to that of Montgomery County to avoid some of the complications that you see in terms of reinventing the wheel. And the ordinance that is before you this evening in draft form does that. It would basically, Montgomery County's current living wage rate is $11.95 an hour, and it is adjusted on an annual basis to reflect increases in the Consumer Price Index for the Washington-Baltimore area. The language in the ordinance basically just sets it at exactly the same rate, and as the county's living wage rate is adjusted, the city's would similarly be adjusted. Like the county's ordinance and many of the other ones that we reviewed, there is a possibility of a credit against the living wage rate if a contractor were to offer health insurance to their employees. Probably the easiest way of kind of depicting this mathematically is to say that a contractor pays $2,080, the equivalent of a full-time number of hours worked by a full-time employee for health insurance, and that contractor could basically get an offset of $1 against the living wage rate. There are a number of policy questions that I think the council has to consider in terms of what type of living wage ordinance it would like to adopt. I'd kind of like to touch on those. I believe the council did receive an email from one of the city residents asking some questions or expressing some concern about some of the provisions in the draft, and I'll try to touch on those to the extent I can. If I overlook something, please let me know. Like both the state and the county's living wage laws, and truthfully most of the other ones that I have reviewed, the draft that is before you this evening would be applicable to for-profit contractors who will be providing services to the city. And I think one of the questions that has been raised is why would this be applicable only to services? The council may recall that staff had presented some information from an organization that basically focuses on living wage laws, referred to the Living Wage Resource Center. And one of the comments that they make is it's often basically applicable to services, and that's pretty much what I have seen mirrored through most of the drafts I have reviewed. I think on a practical basis, the reason that that occurs, and I had this discussion with one of the procurement staff in the city of Charlottesville, is that you're really basically trying to put wages back into the local economy. If you're basically buying a truck, which is in the city's code is defined as a good, who exactly is the employer? Are we talking about the manufacturer of the piece of equipment? Are we talking about the dealership that may process that transaction? But I think the reason that you see most of the living wage ordinances geared towards services is there is this technical question of who exactly is the employer and how exactly do you apply the local city's local living wage ordinance to basically a good. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but that's really the thinking.
So you're saying that we would still be, it would still be okay to buy Chinese goods where the wages are basically slave labor wages?
I'm saying whether or not that's a good thing, Councilmember Siemens. I'm saying that it's not been my experience in those reviewing different living wage ordinances of how you exactly would apply that to the purchase of goods. Who's the employer? Like you say, the city buys Ford trucks, for instance. Are we applying it to Ford Motor Company? Are we applying it to the local dealership? Who are exactly the employees that this is applicable to?
And I guess you could say for each of the components.
That's correct. So that's one issue I did want to address. Most of the living wage laws do have an exemption or set a threshold for a company to have a certain number of employees. The draft that is before you this evening would basically apply the living wage to any contractor or subcontractor that has 10 or more employees. And I guess a couple comments about that. It is whether or not the contractor or the subcontractor employs 10 or more employees. This has nothing to do with how many of those employees are actually assigned to the city's contract. So if they have 11 employees, but only 3 are working on the particular contract that the city is entering into, it would still be applicable. The reason that you sometimes see, and I think often see, an exemption for companies that have less than a certain number of employees is, I think, the issue that I believe Councilmember Williams may have raised, I think, when we had this discussion in early July, is how do you ensure that small firms are not disadvantaged to some degree during the procurement process. And I think the ability of a particularly small firm to perhaps deal with the lack of efficiencies that a larger firm may have, that they're somehow at a competitive disadvantage. And I think there was an article in today's Washington Post about the fact that the state's living wage law is going into effect, and some comments about that. Whether that is, if 10 is the right number or not, I think is ultimately a policy decision for the council. Certainly that's subject to debate and interpretation, but that is the thinking besides exempting some level of firms that have a certain number of employees or less than. I think that's certainly an issue that before the council moves forward with this that you may want to have some discussion about. 10 or more employees is the threshold that Montgomery County includes in its living wage law. Another policy decision that the council may want to talk about is what is the value of the contract that would trigger the application of the city's living wage. The draft that is before you basically mirrors that of the county in terms of it applies to contracts that have a value of $50,000 or more. I would say on a practical basis, and I think the council is aware of this because you approve any type of contracts that have a value of $10,000 or more, that in a smaller organization such as Tacoma Park, a $50,000 value isn't going to hit a lot of contracts, so that may be something that the council may wish to give some consideration of lowering that amount. But that, once again, is a policy matter to be determined by the council. I've seen the figure run the gamut. The state, by contrast, I believe is about $500,000, which certainly would be much too large for an organization of our size. The draft ordinance before you also provides a number of other exemptions. These basically, for the most part, mirror what is in the county, and also those that I saw in other living wage laws that I personally reviewed. Those would be contracts or services that are procured through an emergency procurement process, sole source procurement, cooperative purchase procurement, and then contracts with utilities, other public entities, nonprofits, and if there is to be any kind of specific preclusion of a living wage by federal or state law. And I think there were some questions also raised by Mr. Grimes, who's in the audience this evening, about some of these exemptions. And I'll just kind of tick them off. I think the issue with sole source procurement is by its very nature what we are having to certify to the council and the council's having to accept is that there is only one firm that is able to provide that service to the city. From a practical standpoint, if that firm, for whatever reason, was not willing to abide by the city's living wage law, then you're essentially left with no vendors to provide the needed service. So that's kind of a practical consideration. I think certainly, the council could indicate that it's something that we want to have applicable if at all possible, but I do think that in discussing this matter with the city attorney's office, if we wanted to make it enforceable and the company declined for whatever reason, you're essentially left without a vendor. In terms of cooperative purchase procurements, this does not come up that often because quite often when it comes to contracting for services, it can be challenging to find something that's exactly a mirror image of what the city might need. But there have been some recent examples with engineering services, for example, on a recent stormwater project where we do piggyback off another governmental agency's procurement contract. If we were to basically have a living wage ordinance and the company that the governmental entity whose contract we'd like to piggyback on does not have that, the practical consequence of that would be that the city would no longer be able to piggyback onto that contract, and it may increase the chance that the city would have to do more separate procurements. As I mentioned, from a practical standpoint, we don't often piggyback onto service contracts, but there have been some recent examples where we have. But the city attorney's office has always interpreted cooperative procurements that it really needs to be structured exactly like the entity whose contract we're trying to piggyback on, and unless that entity also had a living wage provision, or even if their living wage provision was structured somehow differently from the city's, that might just result in staff having to basically do more separate procurements rather than cooperative purchase agreements. I think one of the other questions that got raised was the exemption for nonprofit. I can explain to the council what I think the basis for that is. Whether or not you accept it, I think, is a different matter. Similarly to exempting very small firms who have very small staff, many of the living wage ordinances, including the counties, exempt nonprofits, and I think the goal is to ensure that nonprofits are not put at a competitive disadvantage in this process with competing for-profit firms. I think a flip argument could also be made that maybe you're giving nonprofits a competitive advantage by exempting them from the living wage law. But that is the thinking of why it's included. I think there was also some question with how the draft ordinance defined a nonprofit. I mirrored the county's language, which is a 501c3. I think certainly there are perhaps other classifications for nonprofits, but I would say the most common one is a 501c3. If that is an issue that is of concern to the council in terms of how it's defined, assuming you wish to still include an exemption for nonprofits, that's certainly something staff could do more research on. But that's the reason it's phrased as it currently is. Other exemptions that are included were basically that the living wage rate would not be applicable to any employee who is covered by a collective bargaining agreement, participates in any essentially government-sponsored job training program, or summer youth employment program. So I guess kind of in a nutshell, those are sort of the key provisions of the draft living wage ordinance that is before you, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions the council has.
Are there any questions? Terry and then Colleen and then
First, I really appreciate the work that you put into this. It's obviously been quite an endeavor, and it looks like it's been very addressed very comprehensively. The only question I have is regarding the value limit of the exemption, and I just wondered if you had any recommendation on that, or if you have some statistics on procurements that you would be able to provide to this council that would help us to make that decision.
Just to make sure I'm clear, Councilmember Siemens, you're referring to the contract value of $50,000
Right.
or more. In doing this, I mirrored the counties, and I think this was obviously first presented to the council, I think earlier in September, and we just ran out of time. I think from a practical standpoint, if you leave it at $50,000, I don't think it's going to hit that many contracts, which I think is, I don't think the council is interested in doing something that's a little bit more window dressing, but I didn't want to change it from the time it was initially presented to you. I would set some threshold. I think there is a practical basis that the administrative aspects of trying to enforce this if the contract value is too minimal doesn't make sense to me personally, but I think you may want to consider dropping it below $50,000, perhaps somewhere in the 30 or 40,000, probably in that range.
Would certainly like to drop it. Would like to hear your recommendation. Also, some track record over the last year or two of our procurements for service contracts and what the impact would have been.
Yeah, what I can do, at the $50,000 level, I can address that, Councilmember Siemens. It wouldn't be that much trouble to go back and look at a lower level. The ones that have been entered into probably in the last year or two was the question I asked staff. Basically would include like the design charrette for New Hampshire Avenue, some of our street construction contracts, and some of our stormwater line inspection and cleaning. That's kind of at the $50,000 level or above. Some other contracts that come into mind if you were to drop it, for instance, to like $40,000. I believe the contract for Comstock, we had a wrong name in the ordinance. I keep thinking of Comstock, but I'm not sure if that was the correct name of the project. This was a stormwater project that came forward to the council about maybe 2 to 3 months ago. Okay. Yes. That was just over $40,000. Your annual financial audit was in excess of, I think, $40,000.
I guess it would be helpful to see at kind of $10,000 levels, what would happen if it was $10,000, what would happen if it was $20,000, And I think that kind of information will be helpful to this council in making a decision.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Can I just add that the figure I was thinking of was 10, because that's the threshold where it comes to us.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that the deputy city manager is currently working on at my request is looking at the...
Wait a minute, do we have another city manager?
Deputy city manager is basically preparing a redraft of the procurement ordinance for the council's consideration. That's one of his tasks before he retires. And one of the things that we probably will be bringing forward to the council is perhaps an adjustment in that dollar limit. I mean, I'm certainly happy to provide the information, but...
And my thought was to peg it at that level, whatever that level is.
I agree, Councilmember, that would make sense. I mean, one of the things in terms of the enforcement of this is it is helpful if it's sort of tied to some type of formal procurement process where you can actually ensure that the vendors are aware of it in terms of submitting pricing. So I do think there should be some coordination with that.
I think,
I'm sorry, Colleen. I'm sorry.
Councilmember
I forgot.
So this doesn't affect current staff? This is just contracts?
Yeah, there's kind of a two-piece discussion tonight. This is actually an amendment to the procurement ordinance.
Okay.
Which would basically only deal with those services obtained through procurement processes.
Okay, that knocks out, between what Terry said,
That might be the next
two of the questions. But there's one question left, and that is this going to have a significant cost to implement in terms of staff time?
I think certainly there will be, some oversight. I mean, that's necessary. I think we tend to have fairly standard templates to make sure, working with the city attorney's office, that anything that is bid out has certain language in it, just as we do for the nuclear-free provisions. It would basically just be adding a separate provision dealing with the living wage. So once that is drafted, I don't see it as being overly burdensome, but I certainly think there is some oversight that is required.
Yes, I was trying to think about a dollar limit, and it occurred to me that roughly $24,000 is one person full-time for a year, if you think it's about $12 an hour. And it seems to me if we pegged our limit to a multiple of that, and I had been thinking of half of it because a number of our contracts are for much shorter periods than a year. So if we pegged it at half a person for a year, then the amount would increase, this dollar limit would increase over time with the living wage as the living wage increased. And then we wouldn't have to go back and revisit the ordinance because over time, whatever limit we set, if we set a fixed dollar limit, will just get more and more constraining. So this way it would automatically be indexed by the level of living wage. So I think a modification would be not to have a fixed dollar limit, but make it a proportion of the full-time one person at the living wage. Did I make that clear? Is it? I'm just rambling. I also think that since it is part of procurement, we ought to make sure that the procurement regulations that go along with it require that the city department that is proposing the contract do the legwork at the time they are proposing it, particularly at budget time, so that we know ahead of time whether this will affect the amount. I would hate to have us, in other words, approve an amount in the budget for something, and then when they go out to bid, they're surprised that it's a higher amount. So I would like that to be part of the procedure thing, just like the nuclear-free zone is supposed to be done that way also. And I support the more, I'll call it a more broad definition of nonprofit organizations, so that you cover all of what are traditionally thought of as nonprofits, not just the 501c3s.
But they're exempted. You mean you want to exempt
To exempt them, that's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think people have talked about the limit for contracts at which this becomes effective. I agree it needs to be lower, and I think that I like Bruce's idea that it should be the same limit where a contract has to come for council approval. It seems like that makes a certain amount of inherent sense. I like that idea. I guess I would argue against our making our law too much different from the county law, simply that this is a formula that has gone into place in Montgomery County and works at least on some level. And I think we should, unless there's a reason, for example, we're a lot smaller than Montgomery County, so our contract limit might be lower. I think we should stick to this as much as we can. And I had something else which is skipping my mind. Oh, in terms of the nonprofit thing, in terms of nonprofits that provide services, most of the nonprofits that provide services are 501c3s. The significance of a C3 is that it's a tax-deductible, tax-exempt nonprofit. And most of those that you would be going to provide services would probably be 501c3s. So I think that would pretty much cover it. You could have other entities that are tax-exempt, such as associations or other kinds of entities, and I'm not sure I'd want to make it too broad. I think the argument for having
religious organizations, I think, that are not necessarily covered.
If you wouldn't probably be contracting directly with a religious organization, be contracting with a spin-off, which would probably be a C3, a 501c3.
Yeah, maybe.
For example, if you were contracting for, I don't know, daycare or something, you probably wouldn't be contracting with, the Catholic Church. You'd be contracting with Catholic Charities or something.
Or like Adventist Community Services.
Or Adventist Community Services, or something like that. You'd probably be contracting with their C3. There's also issues with a government contracting directly with a religious organization, which might get a little bit dicey. I think that's why most of them have.
No, I was thinking more of associations as a bigger issue than religious ones. Well, we should have staff look into it, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what association we would be contracting for services from. I think most of the entities that we're going to be dealing with would be C3s. I mean, you could say any organization that qualifies for an exemption from federal income taxes, but that might get a bit too broad.
Right.
We can certainly research it a little bit more. And talking to the individual at the county who's responsible for administering their living wage law, his comment to me was that 501c3, I think, is sort of the widely recognized standard of what constitutes a nonprofit. I don't profess to be an expert in the IRS regulations. It's certainly something we can do a little bit more research on and bring this back to the council and give you some other options if that's something you'd like to look at.
Actually, I thought the question was going to be on the other side, why should you exempt nonprofits at all? And I think the issue with nonprofits is that because the purpose of a 501c3 is to provide is to fulfill a charitable, educational, something purpose. Many of them do have sort of special arrangements with people who provide services. Sometimes they're volunteers, and it gets a little bit dicey if you're talking about an organization. Some of the people who work for the organization are sort of compensated volunteers, and it gets a bit dicey.
One thing that we could do is, my recollection that the state of Maryland's law is actually a little bit broader and doesn't just restrict it to 501c3s. It has a different definition of what constitutes a nonprofit, so that's certainly something we can look at a little bit more closely and talk to some state officials and try and get some insight into their thinking and how that's applied.
Yeah, because my recollection of the nonprofits is that there's at least a dozen categories.
But you'd have to look at the number of them that are likely to provide services we would contract for. I mean, probably the only nonprofit that we have any kind of formal arrangement right now is Adventist Community Services, or are there others?
There's actually at least one or two. The entity that we work with on some of the home buying seminars, I believe is a nonprofit, and I think that the agency that we've worked with in terms of doing some of the job skills training for CSAFE, I think is also a nonprofit.
What kind of capacity building?
Councilmember Steen was asking about the capacity building program. I think those are actually individual contractors. I'm not sure they're set up as a 501c3, but I can verify that, Councilmember Siemens. Okay, so my understanding is that the council has a number of issues that they want the city to continue to research, and then this will come back. I'd like to move it through pretty quickly. I'm trying to wrap up all the major things that we're looking at before the end of this council session. If we don't do that, then whoever remains on the council will have to go through the activity of bringing any new council members up to speed and starting from square one for their sake. So it'd be much more efficient if we could do this way. Yeah, we'll try to move expeditiously to get the answers to these questions. To get it done during this council's term, it may just be that we have to do a special session some evening, which we typically have been trying to avoid. Right. My threat is that we'll have, meetings every Monday from now through November the 19th. Okay, and I've already agreed, don't worry, I've already agreed that we won't have a council meeting the night before the election as a courtesy to the candidates and to the city clerk. Okay, final item that we have for discussion this evening is the use of contracted labor and full-time versus part-time employees. This is sort of the flip side of the actual living wage procurement ordinance. When the council was talking about implementing a local living wage law, as well as during the budget process, there was some discussion about the city's use of part-time staffing, and what I mean by that is those positions that are not receiving fringe benefits in particular, as well as contractual labor, which would be hiring laborers, clerical assistants, essentially through a temporary employment agency. At the conclusion of those discussions, what the council had directed is that staff prepare a policy for the council's consideration, essentially outlining the city's formal position on the use of part-time non-benefited staff, as well as contractual labor. And I think the goal was to ensure that both myself as a city manager, as well as any future city managers, would have clear direction of what the council's position is in this regard. So based on the comments that I had heard during those discussions, I kind of took a shot at drafting a policy outlining what I understood the council's position to be. And just kind of paraphrase, as I understood the council's direction is whenever feasible, I think recognizing that there are certain operational needs of the city where the use of contractual labor or non-benefited staff is appropriate, that the council's desire was to try to use its own in-house staff or employees who are eligible for benefits in accordance with our policies and procedures, as well as our collective bargaining agreements. I think we had some discussion that it is inappropriate, this is actually prohibited, I think, by the city's union contracts, but that we would not utilize contractual labor on a continuous basis to avoid paying fringe benefits or to otherwise reduce the city's costs through lower wages, that there is a point in time where if we're using a contractual labor service on a continuous basis, that we should be looking to convert that position to actually in-house staff. I think the council had made some statements regarding the possible privatizing of any existing city services, and I understand there was some past discussion of perhaps the privatization of janitorial services that occurred prior to my tenure, and that the council in that instance did not feel that the cost savings warranted basically the reduction in wages that would be paid to individuals providing custodial services to the city. So the third bullet on this resolution basically would address perhaps any future consideration of privatizing an existing city service along the lines of what the city had done previously in terms of custodial services. There were also statements made by several council members, and I believe Councilmember Clay in particular, I think noting appropriately that there is a kind of a time and a place where using part-time or seasonal positions also offers some job training opportunities, particularly for younger persons, and that it was a desire of the council that we basically value those training opportunities and continue to provide those in some way where appropriate. The last bullet of this, which is something I guess that I had thought might be appropriate going forward, is that by resolution or other type of formal action by the city council, that the city manager be charged with evaluating the manner in which city services are provided on an annual basis, and it would make sense to me that that would be done as part of the annual budget process when the city manager is preparing his or her recommended budget to the council, but would basically examine the city's use of part-time, non-benefited staff, contractual labor, and basically report back to the council during the budget process of any areas where it would be feasible to basically add benefited positions in lieu of using contractual labor or non-benefited positions. So at least there was some mechanism to ensure that that review occurs on an ongoing basis. So that was just my thought, is that it would be done as part of the budget process. Terry?
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Barb, again, I just really appreciate the way you've pulled together the many comments that we had on the night that we discussed this. I think you've done an excellent job. The only thing that I would like to see in this, and I'm not sure that staff is going to be able to come up with it, and that is maybe a little bit of specificity in what some of this means, such as the city will not use contractual labor on a continuous basis, primarily to reduce costs. Continuous basis could be, 3 weeks, it could be 3 months, or it could be 3 years, depending on who's looking at it. And I think that it would be helpful to you and also to this council to have some more specific wording in the resolution.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
Give some thought to what we can put together.
So this, let me phrase that differently. The city is currently in full compliance with this. This won't change our operation or activities in any way, will it? Other than give you an extra job to do at the end of every year.
We look at it anyway, because the council probably could tell from the FY08 budget. I think it's consistent with what we have been doing. I think it does provide, I would say, formal mechanism for setting forth the council's policy direction. And as you indicated, I think, I personally have been basically looking at this on an ad hoc basis as part of the annual budget process, but it would actually formalize that as a responsibility of the city manager.
My understanding when we talked about it before was that council was not unhappy with the positions previous councils had taken. They were concerned that it was not written down in a formal policy that could be sort of evaluated, so that this would address that. Okay. So I think that the city manager will take a look at putting specific, are you talking about specific numbers, Terry, when possible in these?
Exactly right.
Okay. And does this need to come back to the council, or can we look at it as a resolution the next time for action? Okay, we'll bring it back as a resolution for action the next time, because again, this is another thing I'd like to see completed before the end of this council term. Okay. If there's nothing else, we're adjourned. And I want it noted for the record, it is exactly 10 o'clock.
You know how it works?
Actually, it's not even 10 o'clock.
Good job, Mayor.